Hello, good afternoon everybody. Good afternoon members of the Wiltshire and Swindon Combined Fire Authority. This is an extraordinary meeting of the Wiltshire and Swindon Combined Fire Authority. Very good reasons, as will become apparent as the meeting progresses. Right. First of all, I'd just like to welcome Councillor Peter Edge as a new member of the Fire Authority. He has in fact been on before, and we will be writing a letter to retiring Councillor Howard Marshall, who has had to leave us. So we'll be doing that later. Okay, members, let's start the meeting now then. Minutes of the last meeting. Anybody got any points? Yes, Councillor Wayman.
On the top of page 3, where it says the visits with the Environment Agency, I thought at the last meeting that we agreed that the report would come back to the CFA, and that possibility. Anyone else remember that?
Yeah, I vaguely remember something along those lines.
I'm sure you did.
Members, shall we?
Just one point, Chris. We did have a report back to our operational group meeting last week.
No, but that was just about the Avery's fire. This was about the fire service and the Environment Agency inspecting all the other tips and dumps or recycling centres in the county. And I thought we just
I do recall that we did discuss it. I don't know that we'd asked for a report, but I do recall we discussed it. So
yeah.
Maybe it was something we
Okay, yeah, I think generally that was the request at the time. So if we could just put that in, please. And any other points? If not, I'll be happy to sign these off.
Move.
Second. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Okay. Apologies. Councillor Christopher Newbury is feeling unwell. He's got very bad bronchial chest. I spoke to him yesterday and he can hardly speak, so he's not here today. Apart from that, everybody else is. Members' interests. Any declarations of interests from any members regarding this meeting? No? Okay. Chairman's announcements. Okay, well, it's an extraordinary meeting, very little time since the last meeting. I did go up to Parliament with some of the chiefs and the chairman of Dorset Fire Authority to meet our MPs and to discuss option 3, which you're familiar with. And unfortunately we were unable to meet with the Fire Minister, Penny Morden, but we did have a valuable discussion with our MPs, who are generally very supportive of us.
Could we confirm which MPs turned up, please, Mr. Chairman?
If I could remember, John Glenn, is it Duncan Haynes, and the Dorset ones, I don't know,
Okay.
but we did have a representative from James Gray. So, yeah. So it was quite well attended. Right, now, before we come to questions from the public, I want to bring forward item 6. Members, this is great interest, this meeting, to all our staff. Therefore, it's on the table that we webcast this to all members of our staff today. Does anybody have any objections to that? That can I take it that we're all in favour?
Yeah.
That's fine, thank you. Then we can start the webcast, please, Chief. Okay, are there any questions from any members of the public? Nope, so we can strike that off. Right, now, a week or so ago, most members of this authority received a very good presentation from ORS, who carried out a public consultation on our behalf across Wiltshire and Swindon. And we are now going to have a slightly truncated version of that from our FRS representative Dale. So we'll just move back here.
Well, good afternoon, Chair and members. I'm very pleased to be here at what I know is an important meeting for you today. And my presentation will follow the course of the issues on the screen. I think it's important to note that the legal requirements for this public consultation on what is a very important matter of governance affecting the whole future of the authority, legal requirements I'm sure have been completely and adequately fulfilled. The key requirements are that you should consult the public at an early stage before a decision has been taken, and I know that you've been very open-minded about this issue for a considerable time now. But the public should have adequate information to let them think intelligently about the issues and make up their minds in sensible reflection, and a lot of information has been given in the public media and of course in the deliberative forums of the reporting today. I think there's been a 13-week consultation period, and although the reporting timetable has been constrained, I'm absolutely sure that you've had adequate time conscientiously to take these matters into account. And as the Chair said, the meeting we had about a week or so ago was a very detailed examination of all the issues arising from the consultation. But I know that you want the matters to be presented in public as a way, in a sense, of confirming the accountability of the whole process. First of all, these were the elements of the consultation for which we were responsible. A household survey sent out to 6,000 randomly selected households with about a 10% response rate. An open consultation questionnaire available online and for paper copies to be returned, almost 700 of those. 8 in-depth, lengthy deliberative forums with members of the public and 4 deliberative forums with stakeholders, and then no petitions have been received and 16 submissions, 16 sometimes detailed submissions. So I'll be reviewing those, starting I think with the submissions, because it's only in some of those that any significant opposition perhaps was expressed to the to one of the options, to option 3 in practice. All the submissions are available on the website, and so I'll be referring to them only in a very summary way now, just to show the balance of opinion. The submissions essentially, they didn't all favour option 3, far from it, as you can see, but they focused on option 3 in the main. That's to say the proposal, the draft proposal for a merger, or the draft option I should say, for a merger between Wiltshire and Swindon Fire Authority on the one hand and Dorset Fire Authority on the other. Now there were some very vociferous, very clear, very emphatic opponents of that option 3. You can see one MP, a Wiltshire councillor and the Police and Crime Commissioner. One theme of that opposition was that there should be wider collaboration. And the Wiltshire councillor, for example, mentioned wider collaboration being desirable instead of option 3, being desirable, for example, with bordering local authorities, the airport fire and rescue service, the army, the ambulance, the police, and a sequence of other fire and rescue services, including Gloucester, Gloucestershire, Avon, Devon and Somerset, Hampshire, Berkshire and Oxford. So a very ambitious alternative programme of collaboration being proposed by perhaps the most emphatic objector to option 3. Then Wiltshire Council and the FBU, as you see, had no declared position with respect to the options, whereas Swindon Borough Council clearly supported option 3, as did another MP, the Gloucestershire Fire and Rescue Service, Unison, and 3 parish or town councils, Trowbridge, Wilton and Upper Devereux, clearly supported option 3. The Fire Minister and the DCLG wrote separately to support the idea of mergers in principle, but made it very clear that any particular decision about a merger here or there is a matter for local decision. So in a sense, they weren't prejudging your own issue, but stating a general position. Some questions were raised by those like Swindon Borough Council, who supported option 3, or like Wiltshire Council, who didn't express an opinion. Questions about how accountability would be managed, how the equalisation of council tax would be managed, and so on. Those kinds of issues were raised, but it didn't lead, in those cases I've mentioned, Wiltshire and Swindon, it certainly didn't lead to them opposing the option 3 for a merger. Let me turn, though, from the submissions to a more popular view as expressed in the questionnaire findings. That's the open consultation questionnaire and the household survey. Now, both of those means of consultation achieve substantial samples, as you can see, and both of them are pretty representative of the general population, as I'll show you in a few minutes. First of all, just to remind ourselves of the almost 700 responses to the open questionnaire, about half and half paper and online. The household survey was a postal exercise, as you can see, with a 10% response rate overall, slightly higher than that in the Wiltshire area, slightly lower than that at 8% in the Swindon area, but averaging out at 10%. There were no petitions at all. That's surprising in a public consultation of this kind, actually, and it seems to me to indicate there was no overt public opposition, no overt sense of controversy. And as I say, all the questionnaires and comments are available on the website. That's to say, the questionnaire comments are available on the website, just like the submissions are. Looking at the representativeness, if we take the whole of the Wiltshire and Swindon Fire Authority area, that's shown in each band in blue, and the open questionnaire here in terracotta or red, you can see that the open questionnaire achieves a slight underrepresentation of younger people, 16 to 34, an overrepresentation of people 55 plus, that's typical in open questionnaires. It slightly overrepresents men, and it's pretty well there in terms of ethnic minorities. The household survey is a much better picture. It's more precise. It's there on age for all the bands. It's completely representative by age. It's pretty well representative by gender, as you can see, comparing the outcome of the household survey with the outcome for the total population. And it's also there on ethnicity. But the open questionnaire is also reasonably representative. That's not a highly biased sample. And if we just look at some equalities issues in terms of people, whether they have disabilities, you can see that all three of both the methods of consultation match the general population there in terms of limiting disabilities and in terms of religious belief and so on. And those questions, those profiling questions, were asked to test the representativeness, but also to help to fulfill your diversity and equality monitoring requirement. Within the questionnaire and within the deliberative forums, which I'll come to in a few minutes, I have no doubt at all that the questions, the options, were clearly understood. Essentially, while all the options involve collaborations with the wider communities, essentially in the forums I stressed the differences between the options so that people would clearly understand the choice of the options before them. Option 1 was described essentially as a collaboration with local authorities within Wiltshire. Option 2 is essentially a collaboration with Dorset Fire and Rescue Authority, and option 3 as a merger with Dorset Fire and Rescue Authority, recognising that in each case there would be wider collaborations as well. They wouldn't behave, in any case, the authority wouldn't behave like an island separated from its surroundings. And here you can see confirmation that in the questionnaires, the vast number of people felt that they had understood the options in both the household survey and in the open questionnaire. Only a small minority of people said that they didn't think the documents were clear enough for them or could have been clearer, but only a minority said that. Moving to the outcomes and to people's preferences in the open questionnaire, it's very remarkable that you see a profile like this, where people are presented with 3 options, and one of them, option 3 in this case, comes out with more than 3/4 of the population, of the respondent population, supporting it. as members, you'd all love that kind of profile in any local election, I'm sure. And clearly option 3 there has an absolute majority, which simply means that it has more support than the combined support for the other 2 options, even when those are pooled. It's got an absolute majority. That's the open questionnaire. On the household survey, its win isn't so emphatic. It has clear majority support, 43 compared to 27 and 30 respectively for options 2 and option 1. But in order to look at that profile in a little more detail, we effectively deleted option 2, or the first preferences for option 2, and then the second preferences of those who supported option 2 on their first preference, their second preferences were redistributed between options 1 and option 3, and the result of that you see here. So option 3 leads on a majority in the first vote, if I can put it that way, but it achieves an absolute majority in the second round, when the second preferences of option 2 supporters are redistributed. So again, overall, it's a very clear winner. So overwhelmingly, option 3 wins in the open questionnaire. It wins very clearly in the first past the post and on the transfer in the household survey. And option 1 is the second in the household survey, but a very remote second indeed in the open consultation questionnaire. That is a very emphatic result. We did look at equalities issues in the household survey, the open questionnaire, and people were asked if they felt that any of these options, not just option 3, but any of them, had implications for people with protected characteristics. And as you can see, a small number, 4% and 9% respectively, said yes, they thought there were implications, and they were asked to comment and outline those implications on the questionnaire. And once more, those comments are available online. Let me move on then from the quantitative surveys and questionnaires to the deliberative forums. 8 with members of the public, 4 with the business and voluntary sector. The locations are shown around the county very clearly. Effectively, we had 3 in Swindon and 3 in Salisbury. In both those cases, a meeting with the business sector, with the voluntary sector, and also a meeting with randomly selected members of the public. And in the other areas, we had meetings with randomly selected members of the public. So 3 in Swindon, 3 in Salisbury, and single forum meetings and the other bases that you see there. So in all, in the 8 public forums, almost 100 people took part, an average of 12 per meeting. They were randomly recruited by telephone. They were paid a recompense for coming to meetings which lasted towards 3 hours, and we did achieve a diverse range of participants. With the stakeholders, the business and voluntary sector, it was much harder to recruit them or to invite them, despite the best efforts of Wiltshire Fire Authority and despite our own best efforts. A lot of invitations were sent out, not many were taken up. I think a sign, again, that this issue was seen perhaps as something abstract, a governance matter, but also not particularly controversial. But those deliberative forums worked very, very well indeed. Now, I think it's worthwhile reassuring people, particularly people who might oppose option 3, that we did not sell option 3 to the public. I conducted 21 of the 22 meetings in total that were held, that's to say, across Wiltshire and across Wiltshire and Swindon and Dorset. I conducted 21 of those. And we certainly didn't hold a Damoclean sword, a financial Damoclean sword, above the heads of those forums, predicting the end of civilization unless the option saving the most money were adopted. What we did was explain what a merger involved, and we stressed the not altogether encouraging track record of mergers, where attempts to merge have failed. The Isle of Wight and Hampshire, where the Isle of Wight, we conducted the consultation in both places, vehemently rejected the prospect of a merger, and where in East and West Sussex, although it was quite popular with the public, it failed on financial and political grounds. We stressed that track record so people could see what was involved in the merger. And I was very careful to stress that decisions like this are not taken just on financial grounds. One has to look at them as issues of general public policy taking account of independence, autonomy, and the general future of the authority and the community it serves. There are a wide range of considerations important. So this, what you see on the screen now, was the course, the presentation we gave. Remember, many people would have come to these meetings not clearly understanding the difference between the service and the authority, not knowing much about the strategic role and priorities of the Fire and Rescue Service, or the resources it has, or the funding problems that it's facing. So we explained all those issues in a detailed presentation, and, as I say, the meaning of the options and the track record of attempted mergers. And then people had roundtable discussions. So in a meeting of 12, we might have had 3 small roundtable discussions of 4 people each. And they were asked both to score the options with marks out of 100 or points out of 100 in groups, and then individually to express their first and second preferences for the options. Now, again, you can see option 3 emphatically wins out. 6 times more popular on points than option 1, 3.5 times more popular on points than option 2. And then when you move from points to the individual's first choices, option 3 was actually 12 times more popular than options 1 and 2. And options 1 and 2 were about equal on first choices, but 2, collaboration with Dorset Fire Authority, was ahead of 1 on the points score. What was interesting to me, both in the questionnaires and in the forums, was there was no variation by area. That again, I think, is remarkable in terms of the size and extent of Wiltshire, that the areas tended to take very much the same pattern of priorities. So what were their reasons? Because this is the important matter. It's not just a numbers game in consultation. Well, the forums felt that your fire authority has more affinity with another fire authority, in this case Dorset, than with its own local authorities, as in option 1, for example. There was 6 times more likely to think that there's a greater affinity between the 2 fire authorities than between the fire authority and its own immediate local government. They felt that Dorset, as another fire authority, was more specialised and more expert than local authorities, and therefore more able to collaborate. And as you can see, they stressed, we don't mind how a fire engine comes, providing it's there quickly and efficiently. The governance doesn't really matter. It's what Salisbury voluntary sector contributor. So there were lots of reasons that came up in these forums. There's synergy in the Fire and Rescue Service making savings together. It makes business and cultural sense. They could work as one. Most people don't mind how the service is organised, or even where the headquarters is, providing they get a good service when it's needed. And you can see those are respectively from Chippenham, Marlborough and Devizes, members of the public in each case. Again, local authority boundaries are historical and don't necessarily denote sensible areas for fire and road traffic collision services. The decision has to be made about risk and resilience, general public policy, not just finance informing people's views here. But it's easier for 2 fire authorities to make savings together rather than by working with local authorities. So the forums were very clear, in fact, about why they rejected option 1, that's to say, a collaboration between the fire authority and its own local government, why they rejected option 1. Primarily because they felt local government isn't such a suitable partner, and it's got big financial problems of its own. It's making cuts, it's outsourcing, and it's got a wide range of challenging responsibilities, within the context of which the fire authority might be overlooked, so to speak, alongside competing priorities from adult social services and education and so on. And councils, local councils, lack expertise in fire and rescue service matters. And they also made a distinction between a fire authority and a council, seeing the latter is inherently much more political than, say, the way in which a fire authority works. The point there made by a Salisbury public that Wiltshire Council was expensive, so in fact the payroll for the fire authority is outsourced to Devon. Councils will always be too expensive. That point wasn't something that we had told them. That was a member of the public making that point in the Salisbury Forum. Local authorities are not very efficient partners for the fire service. They have to do so much, and they don't have all the skills. You get the message from those quotations. Why did the forums reject option 2 then? Well, the bottom line there, literally, is they found option 2, just a collaboration with Dorset Fire Authority, that is, as an unconvincing halfway house. Better than option 1, yes, in the forums, but complex contractually, legally and organisationally, and doubtful as to the savings it will yield, because there will be no real reductions in senior management and flexi-duty staff. So they rejected that option as a very, very poor second best. We don't want a halfway house. Do it properly or not at all. Collaboration can fade away, so do it properly and merge, get on with it. Salisbury voluntary sector contributed. The reasons for favouring option 3, there was a clear recognition, yes, that it appears in the business case to be the most financially viable option that saves most money. But it wasn't, as you can tell already, just about money. It was about the efficiency, the resilience, the capacity of that service, working with another fire authority, compared to working with unsuitable partners from local government. And they found just the collaboration in option 2, collaborating with Dorset, less convincing as we've seen. So the bottom line there is that efficiency and expertise trump localism. They recognise the importance of localism, but efficiency, resilience and synergy between the organisations trump them. My heart said option 1, but I recognise savings have to be made, and option 3 is the most cost-effective method, and we don't want a halfway house. We want something full and systematic. And so on. You see the same message there from a Trowbridge resident as well. One point that we certainly covered in the forums was the issue about the comparative council tax precept. And I've said already that in the initial presentation, people were given a lot of information about the funding challenges. And in fact, they were showing the council tax precepts for all of these combined fire authorities. Now, the average precept for those fire authorities is almost £71 a year, currently in 14-15. And here we have Wiltshire here below the average, and Dorset also below the average precept. So they appreciated, they understood that both authorities are underfunded in terms of council tax precept, but they also understood why that can't quickly and easily be corrected just by raising the precept by a substantial amount. They understood that the precepts are limited. And they got a sense of the scale of difference between the two precepts, that Wiltshire's precept is currently £2.98 per year, less than Dorset's for Band D households. That information, though, did not, as you can already see, make very much difference to their views. Because council tax equalisation, when we're talking at Band D level of about £2.98 per year, was not perceived as a major problem. They recognise that both authorities are well below average, and therefore there was a sympathy for adjusting the council tax precept within certain limits in order to reconcile the two authorities, and people could themselves be reconciled to the cost. And you see a typical comment there. It's only £3 a year, Band D. And there are many other benefits to compensate, many other benefits from the full merger to compensate. So the forum summary then, just as in the questionnaires, option 3 wins overwhelmingly. And option 2 was more popular than option 1, but it still had, out of 105 first choices, it still had only 8 first choices. But it was a long, long way behind option 1. Sorry, option 3, a long way behind option 3. And option 1, as you can see in the forums, comes third. It's got 8 first choices, but it's behind on points. So, the overall conclusions of the whole consultation process, I think the outcome here is unusually clear-cut. That does not mean that it determines your decision. Of course, the public were told that that was not the case. This was not a referendum. And I certainly take that view that this is an input to your decision-making, but it is unusually clear-cut. There were some critical submissions that I've emphasised, but more submissions supported and opposed option 3, and all the other methods resoundingly favoured option 3 with no variation by area. In fact, in my experience, it is honestly a remarkable consensus from the public consultation. Well, Chair, thank you. That's a resume of the evidence that you considered in much more detail last time, but for the public record, I think it's helpful to go through it, and I hope it contributes to a discussion. So I wish you well for the future, whatever option you choose, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dale. Do we have any questions from members for Dale? I'm aware that most of us gone through that stage. Well, thank you very much, Dale.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. I think members, like to say on behalf of you, it's probably one of the most professional actions and presentations I've seen in a long time. Right. Sitting in that one chair. You don't have a chair. Oh, I've got the chief's chair. Right. I think we can wrap it up now. I think that's it, there's no problem. Okay. Right, members, we now come to item 8, strengthening our fire and rescue service, which is the object of the exercise. We're a standalone fire authority. We're beholden to none, but all members are elected public councillors, officials. And our duty as a fire authority, of course, is to ensure that we always have the correct level of frontline services there to support the public. And about a week and a half ago, I was up at Wiltshire Fire Station, and it was a retained watch was on, and I was just so impressed by the level of professionalism that was shown. They were sitting there drinking cups of tea, just waiting for the call to come in. We had all the equipment there. We had the fire station. We had the training of those individuals there. And in a nutshell, that is what we are about as a fire authority, ensuring that we can meet whatever occasion is thrown at us, our frontline personnel. And that was the object of the exercise, which started over a year ago, where this authority realised that in 2.5 years' time, we would run out of money to maintain our existing frontline capability. It was as simple as that. Over the last 4 or 5 years, the government has been cutting back on the public sector, and they've been cutting back on our central grant. And at the same time, our ability to raise more funds through the precept has also been prevented by being capped at under 2%, unless we have a referendum which would cost us over £1 million, which we don't have. So we looked carefully at the future, and we knew that we had to change in some way. And to do that change, the whole way we went about our business had to change. And especially the fact that in about 2.5 years we would be somewhere like £3.2 million in debt. Now, we are not allowed to run in the red again as a fire authority. That's legislated against. So we put a programme in place which resulted in a number of options. And we are here today to make a decision on where we wish to go on the basis of those options. So what I'm going to do now is hand us over to the Chief, who will give us a presentation on the various business cases, and of course his professional advice from him and his management team. It's all yours, Chief.
Thank you, Chairman, very much indeed. Members, good afternoon. What I'd like to do is to take you through the key issues of the business case itself. What I wanted to do is probably revisit, as the Chairman quite rightly said, about a year to 18 months ago, in respect to the background and the contents of where we've come from, but in particular, actually looking forward, particularly at the financial analysis of the scenarios and the impact that those scenarios will have. and once again in particular, not just around finance, but around service delivery, quality and diversity, community safety and so forth. So it's around the service delivery, because I think that's fundamental, as well as making sure that we can balance the books. What I'd ask is actually, can I suggest that we hold questions until the end, because I might cover some of the areas that you might have questions about as I go through the presentation. But equally, I've got my brigade managers here today who will be able to answer some of the more in-depth questions with regards to their specialisms at the end of my presentation. Also got members of the press and members of the public here, so I've got a few slides just to put into context what the service is about, what the service's responsibilities are and so forth. So if members, you can bear with me, because I know that you're sort of well aware of those particular areas. First of all, looking at the service in general, we average around about 12,500 emergency calls each year. We've got 24 fire engines, of which 18 of those are on-call retained stations and 8 of those are whole-time stations. The majority of our staff, we're quite a large area, but we're quite a relatively small service, but a large majority of those, as most rural services are crewed by retained around 66%, and over 80% of our fire engines actually are crewed by retained personnel. And that's interesting. In a report that's recently come out by Sir Ken Knight, was talking about an average around about 40% for combined fire authorities. So we're well above that, that average. But the mix of staff is fundamental in how we're able to deliver the service in general. Roles and responsibilities are many. Absolutely, the response is fundamental to within our role, but the way that the fire service has moved over the last few years has very much focused in on fire safety, initiative, as well as promotion of fire safety. Obviously, under the Fire Services Act, we've got firefighting, rescues from road traffic collisions and other emergencies within our responsibility. But in 2012, the national framework from the government focused in on a number of key areas, and that was identifying the full range of foreseeable fire and rescue service risks relating to where we were going, and focusing far more onto community safety, working in partnership, and also accountable to the community. And I think we need to hold those when we start thinking of where the service is going to go for the future. So really, in summary for the fire service, we've got 3 main areas: prevention, protection and response. And those naturally fall, as you can see within that slide, around risk analysis, around education, around safety checks for the public. The protection is very much around the legislative side of where we're going, the safety advice and so forth, and the response is around firefighting, rescues, emergencies, protecting the environment. So it's making our public that we serve safe. Over the last few years, particularly since CSR 10, we've had to, like a lot of public sectors, find a reduction over the last 4 years of 25%. And we stripped out just over 4 million over that 4 years from our budget. Austerity, as we know, is projected well into 2020. And in fact, we've only heard recently that it's likely to run for this whole generation that we've got. So we're looking long-term forward, and that's the whole point of where we're looking to focus the organisation. Financial pressures absolutely continue, and the funding baseline that we had will not go back to where it was. We need to look at new levels. Big impact on fire and rescue services in general. We're no exception to that, and that's why we are looking to see where the service needs to move into a different place to be able to meet those challenges. So strategic direction from yourselves, members, is what is needed for us to be able to ensure that the service remains local, it is viable and is resilient and is funded suitably to be able to deliver to the public. And the government, as Dale has touched on in his presentation, is encouraging in the real change agenda. So Ken Knight, as I mentioned earlier, his report was looking at a range of options. One of those was around working with the public sector, within local authorities, looking at mergers, looking at combinations, looking at mutuals, all those types of areas. But the government is intent in looking to see public sectors moving in a different place. Picking up on what Dale was talking about and where our funding comes from, our funding of 25 million, just shy of 25 million, is split between 40% from government funding and 60% from the precept. And as you can look from this, this line of funding matrix here, that Wiltshire is very low down, in fact the second from the bottom with regards to how we're funded by the government. Well below the funding per head for population in this year. And ironically, once again, as Dale picked up, if we were funded at the national average, we would find we were receiving an extra 3.2 million per year, which would put us into a different place in where we are at this current time. Obviously, I would suggest that the funding that we are experiencing now, the reductions from government grant, are causing those financial difficulties, as is the restriction of the percentage we can make within the precept. But we are where we are, and we need to be able to make sure that we can move forward in a different place. The other 60%, the other 15 million approximately, comes from fire precept. Once again, you can see that we're in the bottom quartile for that. We are once again, well below the average of the 70.5 pounds per head, per band of band D for properties. Looking at both of those examples, this one here with ourselves with Dorset and also ourselves within this one with Dorset, both of us once again are well below the national average. And there's a £2.98 difference that we've got. So we can, if we need to, look to see how we're going to take that forward. But we still, like other Shire services, still have the challenges that are within the old structure of the mechanism for funding. And I would suggest to you that where the original funding was set out by government, it was very much around the petrochemical industry, the heavy industry and so forth. We now, as Shire Services, have a significant risk because of the changing demographics, the rural sparsity and everything else which is being brought to us. So there's some real challenges which we still need to address, but we're getting less funds from, and we need to be able to move forward with those particular areas. Looking at reserves, yes, we do have reserves, but our reserves are relatively small. We've got 6 million earmarked funds, of which 1.7 of those are unused grants, such as the Network Fire Control Services partnership, and we've also got a £1.5 million grant for transformation, which is what we're going to need to use our money for to be able to move forward. Our general reserves are small, and those are the reserves that we need to be able to protect to take us forward. We've got 2.1, that's over and above at the moment the set limit of 0.6 to 1.5 million, which was approved by members and agreed with the Audit Commission as a suitable figure. And I know that the Finance Director, Phil Chow, will be bringing a report to you at the next CFA to look, following a risk assessment, to see whether that limit should be raised to 1.5 and above that over the period of time at the next December CFA. So we have challenges, ladies and gentlemen, and what we need to do is to see how we're going to resolve that. And this slide here gives you some understanding of the position. These figures shouldn't be of a surprise to you, because this is what has been the bedrock of our discussions over the last year to year and a half. We've got some assumptions in here, in as much that we recognise that 8.2% reductions next year within our grant, and then 5.5% for the following years. We've also made an assumption of a 2 or just under 2% increase in council tax over the next few years. And we've also factored into this inflation and so forth. So as you can see from the slide that you've got in front of you here, that we're looking by 2017-18, if we don't do something different, we are going to have a funding gap at best of 3.1, at worst, that's with a 0% increase of just shy of 4 million. And looking at the reserves we had, we will be, if you're looking at the general reserves, insolvent by 2016. So we need to move forward with regards to how we're going to do it. There's been a considerable amount of good work amongst the public sector in looking at back office staff. okay, corporate staff, and how we can find the savings. And we're no exception to that. We've been looking at how we can deal with our back office elements in a more structured way. We've gone for voluntary redundancies, etc., etc. But that said, all we spend on our total corporate staff, the cost is around about 2.7 million. And my view actually is there isn't such a thing as back office and front end of the service, because we're a single service in the way that we deliver and what we need to deliver. Because without our corporate staff, we're not able to deliver the response service that we've got and the community safety and fire safety in general. So we need to look at this, but even if you consider factoring out and getting rid of all of the corporate elements that we have within the service, we still won't make the shortfall that we've got within our budget gap, which is here. So once again, we need to look to see how we're going to move forward with regards to the service. You'll recall, members, that back prior to December of last year, when we were looking to see how we were going to bridge that gap, we looked at a number of options. We looked at, in fact, 6 options, and through that process, we developed a strategic options appraisal, which covered all of these areas and considered how we would be able to find funding through the best way of a service being delivered, whether that's remaining independent, whether that's through local authority, police, ambulance, etc., etc. And at that particular meeting in December, you members decided that one of the ways that we should look at, and the way that we should progress, would be around a combination with Dorset. But actually, in my view, we were clumsy in the way that we presented that, because the reception that we had when we were talking to Swindon Borough Council leaders and Wiltshire Council leaders and so forth was very much around, we're going to do that in its separate stage without taking into consideration all of the other good work that we do with the ambulance, with the police, with the council and so forth. So we developed a 7th option. And this was the option that we brought to the CFA in December, looking at a draft combination with Dorset. And the recommendations from that December meeting were, subject to due diligence, a full draft business case should be pulled together for presentation to yourselves in September 14, for both authorities to work towards a goal of combining in April 16. There was a need for a joint political oversight board, changed to a combination oversight board at a latter time, but that was to pull together then a number of members from both Dorset and from Wiltshire into a board that could look to see how they were going to do and then report back to the various CFAs on a periodic basis on how things were going. No decisions to be made by that board at all. Programme arrangements were put in place, but also underpinning that, the government had put forward an opportunity for a government grant for efficiencies for services to bid for. And the instruction was from you members was for us to put together a bid for that transformational funding to support the combination, which is what we did. We put a £5.6 million bid in, and I'll cover that a bit later on. In June of this year, it was decided at the AGM that there was a need actually for us, rather than going for one option, for us to consider a number of options. That was a request from information that you had received through various channels, and we needed to broaden out a single option to a number of options. In discussion with ORS and with Dorset and so forth, it was decided that actually the 7 original options were too many. And we ought to go for a smaller number that the general public would be able to hone in on and give some real qualitative comments with regards to where the organisation should go. So the urgency committee pulled together 3 options, okay, and they brought these options forward for consultation. They were to stay independent, but collaborate with Wiltshire Council and Swindon Borough Council. They were to remain independent, but collaborate with Dorset Fire Authority and also collaborate with Wiltshire Council and Swindon Borough Council. And finally to merge with, but actually to continue to collaborate with all of the other services and authorities that each of the two authorities currently work with. But in addition to ensuring that all of the good work that's happening within the police, the ambulance and other local authorities remains and continues. So that's where we were, and that's where we have now gone out to consultation, and that's what Dale has just presented to you earlier this afternoon. What took us there was a considerable amount of work, a considerable amount of due diligence work with key documents of where we needed to go. And I recall from a very early meeting that you, as members, instructed myself and my management team that this wasn't just a cost-cutting exercise. This was to ensure that the service also remained strong and able to deliver at a local level. So what we did was we produced a number of documents, and the first one revolved around a new vision of what a service should be. So it's not just around efficiencies and cost cutting, it's around actually making sure that the service that we are moving to, whichever the option is, makes an assurance that it's safe, strong and sustainable. And what I mean by that, by safe, I mean that our staff and the general public who we serve are safe in the way that we respond, etc. Also strong in as much that we want to be and we need to be a strong partner within the local communities to ensure that we can give the best we can and make sure that we're at the table to be able to deliver and give a safe community environment. And last but not least is sustainable. And the sustainability is not just around finance. Absolutely we need to be solvent, but it's around resilience, etc. So all of those three areas underpin all of the other documents that we put together. Transformational bid I'll come on to in a minute. Dale has dealt with the public consultation, but also what we needed to do was to ensure that you were assured that wherever the organisation went, and particularly if it went into a combination, that all of your due responsibilities were met. So areas around the Fire Services Act, areas around the civil contingencies, health and safety, and all those particular areas that we deliver on your behalf as a service are met. So what we did was we mapped both Wiltshire's and Dorset's together, and if we went for a combination, you had the assurance, and government had the assurance, that all of those areas of compliance that are required on yourselves are met. In addition to that, what we did do is we looked at all of our top spending departments, and we went through the top 10, and you can see there in blue the areas that we looked at. They're not in any order of spend, I hasten to add, with senior management sitting at the top, but we went through all of those and we looked at them. And what we said to the heads of departments, we want you to look at 10, 15 and 25% savings within each of your departments. Pegging back to the vision of safe, strong and sustainable, making sure that fits through, how could you make sure that you can make those cuts but also ensure that you've got a sustainable, strong, safe organisation. And what we factored out of that then was £4 million pounds, okay, but still running a really efficient and effective service. I hasten to add that 4 million, harking back to some of the other findings that we've got, 2.7 million of that is in a fire solution. You can't get that from any other way than with a fire remit. So that's where we came from. That has all been audited by external auditors to make sure that it meets the needs of both yourself and a new organisation itself. So we then move to the final business case, and there is a a report out by DCLG, which talks about the voluntary combinations and how we should do it. And we've gone and used this extensively in looking at whether we should go down a line of a combination. We've also, as you I'm sure aware, that Scotland now has moved from 8 services to 1 service, and we've met with the personnel who have been involved in that, the project managers and so forth, to learn from them. We've also learned from Governor Somerset, who combined some 10, 13 years ago, I think it was, and we've learned the lessons from them as well. We've also revisited our strategic options appraisal, and we've looked now at key areas around finance, around governance, around service delivery, around all of the areas around people, environment and so forth, to make sure that where the business case fits, we are able to meet all of those. We've had a real external and internal auditors' view of it, and they support the methodology that we've done together with determining the savings and investments. Dale has already touched on, I'm not going to go into it in any depth, the robust external validation that we've gone through, but only today I heard from the Consultation Institute that they are happy to confirm that the consultation is on track to receive their endorsement as best practice. So I hope, ladies and gents, that gives you a real assurance of where we have ensured that due diligence and the robustness of consultation has been met, apart from the presentation that Dale has given to you. Been a large number of supporting documents and assessments which are all publicly available, which are sitting here, and they're sitting on our intranet for you to look at and to be able to take information from should you be approached by members of the public that you represent. I've also got really on the table here just the top edge of all the work that has been done to be able to make sure that we have a solid and robust process. Also looking at your medium-term financial plan, okay, we've taken some of the common financial assumptions from it. As I mentioned to you, we've taken the fact of grant reductions for next year at 8.2 and then 5.5% thereafter for the next 3 years. We've also, where stated, financial analysis looked at a precept of just under 2%. And we've also recognised within the figures that we've put forward in front of you within the business case that if it goes to a 0% increase, then we will have annually an 800k budget gap. Okay, so that's the difference between the 2 and the 0. So looking at the scenarios, ladies and gents, if I can, taking those assumptions into consideration, we did map forward for last year a 2% pay rise, which has been given as a 1% now, and so that will give us savings of 0.18 million. The Joint Control and Command Centre, which is moving up to Wiltshire from Dorset, will give us savings of 0.379, I wish it was 379 million, but 0.379 million, which is half the total savings of the 2 services. Phil Chow, the Brigade Manager, together with the finance directors of Wiltshire, of Swindon and of the police, have met and they've done a really comprehensive review, as was your wish, of where some likely savings could come from with the local authorities. And from that, it's been factored out that there are realistic savings of between 0.36 and 0.74 million within that particular work, with a likely savings of around about £500,000. And that's all that could be teased out of it at this current time. So that, looking at that, then a total savings to a fire service in particular is between 0.9 and 1.3 million. So that still gives us a significant deficit of 1.8 to 2.2 for this current year, moving forward in 2 million and a half to 2.9 for the following year. So that would mean, as a scenario, that as a professional judgment from the fire service officers, that we would be looking at frontline services. we would need to look to see how we would deal with response times and reduce the ability to fire prevention activities and the resilience element. So putting that into context, best case, budget gap of 3.1 million, saving range of between 0.9 to 1.3, with a remaining gap of 2.2 to 1.8. Okay. Doesn't mean no standing alone, absolutely maintain sovereignty, but there's some real downsides of that with regards to our savings, with regards to how we were going to deliver the service. The transformation of funding, which I touched on with you, will be exhausted by 2016-17, and we would lose the transformational bid that we have been awarded by the government. Pictorially, in a graph you can see therefore best to worst case and how that works within the funding elements of that. And all of these are obviously in your business case. What I've done is, and I said, this isn't just around cost cutting, this isn't around just finding the money. What we needed to also do, looking at the vision, etc., is to see what impacts and issues and risks that would have within the service under the three various options. I know this is too small, but it's there really for you to show is the amount of red and amber that comes out with scenario one. Okay, there are some significant risks within there, and once again, those are in your business case for you to look at. So we looked at elements of the service delivery, governance, reputation, transformation. We've looked at the equality and impacts, and we've looked at the community safety and partnerships and so forth. And all of those have come out with a high risk element with option 1. Looking at option 2, ladies and gentlemen, once again we've looked at the areas that we've already covered, but in addition, the joint working with Dorset Fire and Rescue Service, in particular the non-operational resource and staff elements. Because there's a real difference between option 3, which is around a combination, and a collaborative approach, which is around option 2. There are things that you can do around collaborative that you can't do unless you merge, because there are legal requirements placed on you as members and myself as your professional advisor to ensure that we can meet the requirements of the Fire Services Act. And therefore, a lot of the legal and compliance elements are not able to be met by two individual services, because there would be pressures and tensions of drawing and using staff in different ways. What also option 2 would mean is that there would be opportunities for the two collaborative organisations, Dorset and ourselves, actually to look elsewhere if the savings could be found in better places. So it wouldn't be a matter of always looking for Dorset. It would be actually looking outside further. Yes, we will be looking at Wiltshire. Yes, we'll be looking at Swindon for those. But once again, as an example for that is we have gone outside for our payroll to Dorset, to Devon, because of the cost effectiveness of having it done down there rather than at Wiltshire or in Swindon. And we would look to see whether we could do that, and so would Dorset. They would look to see where they could get the best option from. So if one reads into the savings from the department reviews that I've touched on, it's looking like savings are between 6.6 million with Dorset and the local authorities, rising to 1.2 million when we look at the pay awards and the JCC savings. And also our transformational reserve will be used by 16 to 17. So once again, pictorially, best case 3.1 million budget gap, savings range around about 1 to 1.3 million, and the budget gap would remain around about 2 million. Maintain sovereignty, absolutely. Okay, savings would be made sooner in scenario 1 because there was a fire element there which we'll be able to tap into earlier. But once again, the risks within there are still significant with regards to service delivery, transformational reserves, and the transformational funding that we were likely to get. And this once again shows you in a pictorial form where those gaps, etc., are for worst and best case scenarios. Once again, not just around the efficiencies, but it's around the effectiveness, what will be lost. And there's no, once again, because there's so little difference between option 1 and 2, and the opportunity for each of the services to look outside, away from the particular collaborative services of Dorset and Wiltshire, the risks still remain are high and in the red. So moving forward to scenario 3, and under this scenario, a new combination combined fire authority would need to be set up. We would need to dissolve the 2 existing fire authorities. Due diligence process would include the learning lessons from Devon, Somerset and Scotland, as with others. And looking at some of the areas that we parked, if you recall, ladies and gentlemen, when we were on the transformational programme that we had back in 2010, we deliberately parked a number of areas that we were working towards, looking at collective crewing arrangements, etc., etc. It looks as if the savings would be around about 1.5 million at best, with a surplus of 1.2, and worst case of 150,000 between the 2 services. The reason, I don't know whether the Chairman, I'm sure the Chairman will pick up on the equalisation of fire precept a bit later on, but once again, as Dale has already touched on, Band D for Dorset is 66.6, and for Wiltshire it's 63.62, a difference of 2.98. Both are well below the average of £70, and it follows that if we harmonise with the Dorset level, we'll still be well below the CFA average that we've got. There are a number of ways of doing it, and we've been talking to government in quite a lot of depth with regards to trying to ensure that we can move to a suitable precept level. And if we work with an alternative notional amount, which is bringing those 2 precepts together, which we've got fundamental agreement from ministers, then what that would mean is if we went up to Dorset's level, or we levelled out against Dorset and Wiltshire, there's a 5 to 8p difference increase per week on the Band D premises. That's all we're talking about. And obviously, if that causes problems for individuals on a much lower income band, then that would be covered by allowances and so forth that would come from government and from the council tax and so forth. So if we harmonise, we would be looking at, if harmonisation can't be achieved by 2016 and 17, then we would lose, as I mentioned before, around about £800,000, right, which is equivalent of 20% of the combined savings that we're looking at to be able to move forward. So scenario 3, looking and following on from the reviews of the duty systems, crewing, etc., together with the pay award, together with the joint control and command centre, best case we'll be looking at 6.7 million, mid likely around about 6 million. We'd be financially solvent in both the best and the likely, and the worst case would be, as I mentioned earlier, about 150,000 short between the 2 services, and that could easily be found from the transformational reserves. Reserves would be healthy, and certainly the general reserves of a prudent level of 2.5 million between the 2 services would give us around about 4.5 of our combined revenue budget of 55 million. So once again, looking at this, you can see that all of those particular areas, well, the first 2, the likely and the best, is in surplus, and the worst case, you've got a small gap of 150,000. Looking at reserves across the 3 options, the reserves for scenario 1 and scenario 2 dip below the 0 within 2015-16 year, whereas the reserves for scenario 3 remain very much in the positive right the way through. Touching on the transformational bid, if I can, Wiltshire put forward on behalf of Dorset and ourselves a bid of 5.6 million, and it was to cover three main areas. One was to extend the streetwise, the safety centres that are down in Dorset into Wiltshire, and the intention is that we would place that in Salisbury area to start with the intention of then moving another one up into the Swindon area, and that is to educate additional 15 to 20,000 young people through a programme of education, not just around fire, but it's around things like nightclubs, it's around street awareness, it's around drugs, it's around all the areas, which fits absolutely with the PCC's agenda. And we're looking to locate that together with a multi-agency strategic hub in the middle of the county. So a large proportion of the money that we are looking at will fall into Wiltshire. There's a small amount of money for harmonisation of ICT, and then there was a small amount, once again, for transformation. The large percentage of the money is around ICT and the strategic hubs. What we've been successful in is achieving a £5.54 million award from government, so we were just short of the full request, and we were the only fire services to get that amount. We were top of the tree with regards to that. The other bids were in more multi-agency. So I think that shows the support that the government has for where we were looking to go. Once again, looking at scenario 3, if I can. Once again, certainly not all green. Recognise it's not all green because we've still got a number of areas that we would need to look at. But generally, it is in the positive element. Best case and worst case for community safety partnerships in the positive. And I factored this one out deliberately because it's been a concern, both of the two councils, that we would be moving away from some of the work that we were doing. And if you can see from this scenario, once again, it's on your page of 52 and 53 within your book, that it shows that we are looking not only to maintain, but actually to increase the level of home fire safety checks that we do at homes as a combined fire authority, moving from 15 to 28,000 in the way that we are factoring out our particular staffing levels. We're looking at ensuring that we maintain our Safe Drive Stay Alive and our Salamander projects and so forth. So all of that gives a very positive and I hope an encouraging feel to both of the constituent authorities who I know were concerned that we'd be stepping away from some of the good work that we already do. So bringing those together, if you look at the financial analysis as a summary, Scenario 1 and Scenario 2 are both high risk. Scenario 3 is of a low risk, and we're looking there, as you can see, with the sums which I've already covered of where we are with regards to budget cap and so forth. Within the risk analysis, once again, Scenario 1 and 2 do not come out very favourably because they're so close together, whereas Scenario 3 as a combination comes out as a very front runner with regards to risk impact or the lack of risk impact. And overall, picking up on the rankings, and once again you can obviously feed these into a number of the other scenarios, but looking at it, Scenario 1 comes out best when you factor in whole-time duty system reviews and harmonisation of crewing arrangements. So ladies and gentlemen, really just in conclusion, I draw your attention to the front sheet of your paper that you had with regards to the business case, and the recommendation in front of you is to consider and discuss the contents of the business case and determine which of the three scenarios will secure an efficient and effective and a financially viable fire rescue service for the residents of Wiltshire and Swindon, and also to determine a preferred scenario direction, and so doing, taking regard to the strong recommendations that I've been giving you, and so has the Financial Director for now over the course of this period in support of the combination of Scenario 3.
Thank you, Chief. Members, do we have any questions for the Chief and his team? No? Thank you, Chief. That was very good. For those who are not generally at Fire Authority meetings, you should realise that the members have had an abundance of reports, draft business cases throughout the year, supporting all the various scenarios, and we've had various consultation meetings on all of them. So every member here is well versed in everything that has just been put across the screen. But it does summarise it rather well. Having said that, I just did want to mention, members, before we start our deliberations, that I did have a letter, I think most of you did, from the FBU, which had quite an interesting pamphlet in it, in which I couldn't actually see any difference between what the FBU required from the authority and what the authority is actually requiring from ourselves. We want to maintain full frontline services, stations, no redundancies, good level of pay, good conditions, and we want that going forward. And I did write back and say that I saw no issues at all. So that's interesting. What the FBU wanted, we also wanted. So just thought I'd throw that one into the mix.
Chairman, could I also...
Yes, certainly.
Unison report.
Yes, we did mention the Unison letter, and again the Unison, which I gather within, they supported option 3, didn't they? Which is quite interesting again. So members, with that, having had all the base information we summarised for ourselves, we should open the discussion on this. Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's gosh, it's with a heavy heart I find myself here today, having to deliberate on this. The background of the unthinkable, of the fire and rescue service being bankrupt. How did we arrive here? Well, I think we've got to take this on the chin that this authority and the government have ignored the advice of the professionals, of the Chief Officer, the Fire Brigades Union, and we are where we are, looking at bankruptcy or merger. Well, if the merger is to be successful, if we're to see a fire service fit for the future, then I think, to me, option 3 is the only choice. But let's be clear on this, that it's not the panacea of perfection of a truly funded and properly run fire service. We're still going to be desperately thin on the ground. The men and women that run this fire service, and I mean everybody from the operational to the corporate staff, punch above their weight. I think it's up to us to ensure that we're not voting to slow the race to the bottom, but what we're voting for is to improve this service, fund it properly, and be proud of this service in 4 or 5 years' time. That all said, I will be voting for option 3, and I hope that this authority, and being part of that authority, make the right decision on making sure that we go forward in the future having a properly funded service. That's it, Chair.
Sure. Andrew.
I wanted, in a sense, to say something similar to Joe, who of course is also a Swindon councillor, but in particular wanted to stress the fact that in Swindon we have also examined at length the business case that's been put forward, and we were happy to actually agree the costings that have been put forward and the scenario effectiveness in terms of how the budget could be controlled and so on. So from my perspective, I think the other Swindon councillors hopefully will agree, we have examined the same case as the CFA has, and we have come to the same conclusions in terms of the value of the information that's there. So I think that we are basing our decisions on a proven record of information, which I think is very important to understand.
Thank you, Andrew. Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It appears to me, who's been a supporter of the third option since early this year, I've been convinced since I first saw the comparative figures that option 3 was the most likely solution to the dilemma we find ourselves in. And I've heard the naysayers who have said on a number of occasions, oh, you can't do this, you haven't investigated that, and you haven't investigated this, and you haven't talked with them, and you haven't talked with us. Well, in fact, we did. And the more information that was produced as a result of those deliberations, the more option 3 came to be the most attractive option.
That being said, I've also had the opportunity to consult with fire officers in the Swindon area, and the overriding message is that we want to sustain and retain the service in the fire stations on the ground to respond in appropriate time to emergencies that might well save lives. And that's the overriding message. That being said, and clearly on that basis, financially option 3 is the appropriate option to support. I would say that, speaking personally, council precept rationalisation must be a going forward consideration. Equally, an appropriate scheme of governance must be involved in putting forward option 3, and humorously, we must actually consider a new name. So, with those 3, profound caveats, clearly, I believe I and fellow councillors will support option 3.
Thank you, Nick. Bob.
As a relatively new member to the authority, finding myself joined just 18 months ago and inundated with paperwork, I have to say, firstly, a great thank you to the staff for the way in which this has been presented through the Chief Officer and his staff. I have indulged many hours reading this stuff, sad as it may seem, because I didn't want to be led by those members that have been here longer. I've heard already members saying, Councillor Payne amongst them, how this is going to be. There are 3 points which I'd like to make, which has been made by my colleague here, about the government, the precept and the names, funnily enough, because it's one of those things that has to be worded into the order. I have spent that many hours reading those documents. I have come to my own conclusion by myself, without will of anyone else, and there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, for this force to go forward, it has to be option 3.
Thank you, Bob. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. It's interesting to note that the police precept for this current year is £160.92. So if you put that in context of what we're actually paying for the fire service, it's very good value for money. I think it's fair to say the consultation process has been very comprehensive, and it's proved that option 3 is the only way to protect our frontline services. To me, it's such a shame that the whole process has been politically hijacked in May this year, and perhaps after the decision has been made today, that the politics is taken out of the fire service, and we move forward with the best interests of the public and the fire service to heart, and we draw a line under where we are and move forward. Still a lot of work to do, Chairman. I look forward to taking part of that. Thank you.
Bridget.
Thank you. I'm not sure I agree. Well, I'm not sure I agree about it being politically hijacked, but the additional work that was carried out, I think, has been very beneficial, and it's confirmed to us that, in fact, option 3 is the one that we have to go for. There were quite a lot of questions about the first 2 options that needed answering, and they have been answered. And I think it makes us much more secure in considering that the third option is the right one to take. But there are those caveats with the precept equalisation. We cannot go forward unless our precept is brought up to the Dorset precept level. I don't think there's a middle way. With Dorset's precept cannot come down. We have to move up to their precept to put us into a secure financial future. Well, still slightly precarious in the future. I mean, we're not out of the woods, but it's a good footing to start with. And obviously the other concern that we have talked about is, it is the precept harmonisation. What was the other? There are a few other things that I do have some slight problems with. The bid that from DCLG, we're looking at the safety centre and the multi-agency strategic hub. I know Simon mentioned that it could be in Salisbury. I think these are decisions that we need to look at very carefully in the future to make sure that we do get the right location for these places. There is one other question that I had as well, which I'm sure Phil will bring back to us at the December CFA meeting, when we're talking about the reserves going down, or bringing our reserve up to 1.5 million on a 25 million budget, which is about 6%. And then when I look at page 46, it's talking about limiting the general reserve for a possible combined authority to 4.5%. So there is, and taking money out of that, which is available for the transformation programme. I think I would quite like to have some careful consideration of that figure before we agree to it. So I think there are a lot of things that are going to happen. Let's talk about governance, which I think the Swindon members have mentioned that we will look at in the future. But I think today we are just deciding which option to go for, and we want plenty of other information and papers to come back to the CFA in the future for us to make the right decisions on.
Absolutely, and we're sure that does happen, but you're right, it's a lot to be achieved going forward. Gary?
Yeah, many of my colleagues have spoken very eloquently about their deliberations on it, but what I think actually is most important here is in fact this document that RS obviously led us on, and that is public consultation. We deliberated for a very long time about how we would actually engage with the public, and I shouldn't take it too lightly that in fact the public, businesses and voluntary sectors in Swindon and Wiltshire have spoken very clearly. So we need to actually lay down that in fact we have made not just new notes, but have actually taken on board what the public have told us to do. As a councillor, I get accused many, many times of going through the process of consultation when the decision had already been made. This time it hadn't been, and the public have actually spoken, and I think we can be very pleased that when we do go forward with this, that we do have the backing of the public, the business and the voluntary sector of Swindon and Wiltshire.
Absolutely. Ernie?
Thanks, Chairman. Well, I'm in the happy position of having no political master to serve, being independent on here. Certainly, I'll be supporting option 3 because, as has been pointed out, it's what the public have overwhelmingly said that they want us to do. And certainly, from all the paperwork we've had, it seems to be the best way forward. I would pick up on something that somebody said about, I think earlier on, there was somebody, or some months back, there was some debate as to whether we should try and stall this until after the election. But for those of us who went to the LGA conference a few months ago, Hilary Benn made it quite clear that if Labour were to succeed next May, there wouldn't be a huge increase in public spending, so there's no panacea there for us. So I don't think there's any point in trying to sit there. Picking up on what Bridget was saying, there's far more things to look at if we do go with option 3 today. It's quite interesting that on page 44 of the Strengthening Our Fire and Rescue Service, I note that when we get to 1819, even the best case scenario dips below the blue line, so obviously there's still lots of work for us to do. But I think the general consensus around the table is the best way forward, and the way it's going to serve the public best and keep frontline services is option 3. So, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ernie. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with everything that's been said this afternoon by other members. I won't repeat what's been said, but I would just like to say that I'm convinced that the whole process that's been carried out has been conducted with due diligence, and therefore, I'll support option 3. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. Again, I think really we've said most of the things, but coming back specifically to the 3 issues that we've highlighted again, because the timetable will require us to get certain things in motion in order to go through the order and to reach the harmonisation of the precept. But we were talking extensively about a new identity, obviously, and in order to try and reinforce the whole idea, if you like, that we are becoming a new region in our own right. One of the things in particular that's important is the name, and I would hope that we will arrange to go through staff in terms of looking at some suggestions as to how they feel an identity could come forward out of a name of their choosing. I hope we can do that, Chair.
Yes, Andrew, indeed.
If I may, Chair, I just want to support Councillor Wayman really on the precept of equalisation and bringing Wiltshire up to that Dorset's. I'd like to see those words in as a caveat to any motion put forward.
And the timetable.
Right, yes. If there's no members wishing to speak, I guess it's my turn. There are a couple of issues that were raised there, and which we have, of course, discussed before. I'll just bring in the first one, which was only lightly touched upon, equality of representation. If we go for option 3, we are 2 less in this authority than in Dorset's authority. So, in generalised discussions before this decision was taken, we would have to have equality of representation. There's no two ways about it. And the most likely form would be that we would increase our membership by 2 to match that of Dorset. That's if we go for option 3.
We might also want area boards, Chair.
Pardon?
We might also want area boards.
Yes, I mean, and that is something we need to look at. On the question of finance, that there is the possibility going forward where you would dip below the black for short periods or whatever. I was at a meeting up at Y Boston with all the chairs and the chiefs a month or so ago, and myself and the chair of Dorset were talking about the outline of going forward if we were to go down this route. And I said, of course, there is always the law of unforeseen consequences going forward. And the chief of Somerset, I think it was, said, we went down this merger route, and one of the things we found was that it opened up many more options for savings than we had envisaged at the start. And so there is that area to consider if we go on option 3. But the other thing is, and I get a feeling here that we're all behind option 3. So you mentioned about the precept equalisation, and we realise it is a salient underpinning of our business case if we went forward on option 3. So what Dorset did, who voted last week for option 3, they put a caveat in their motion, and I'm going to propose that we do the same here, members. So our motion would read that, subject to assurance in writing by 31st of December 2014 from the DCLG, that precept equalisation to Dorset's level of precept will take place in 2015-16 or 2016-17. Because up to that period we're underpinning ourselves our own reserves, remember. And to there being no adverse impact on the business case, Wiltshire and Swindon Fire Authority should adopt scenario 3 as its preferred option. Does that meet with your approval?
Now that leaves governance out there, doesn't it?
Governance, I can assure you that from initial discussions that the COP has had, is a given. There will be equality representation. That's a given.
Nonetheless, Mr. Chairman, forgive me for sounding a note of caution. How many times have you been promised crumbs from the table and you end up hungry? I would put it in there as a belt and braces. And let's not lose sight of the fact that we just dipped out 2 years ago when the £5 precept level for 6 fire authorities, I think, was applied, and we just dipped out by 2 positions.
Yeah.
If we'd have had that £5, then we wouldn't necessarily be arguing, because they were actually below us at the time.
Yes. Yes.
As you recall. And there are 25 towns and parish councils in Wiltshire who have a precept higher than the fire authority.
Oh, well known.
And they can raise by whatever they want.
But Graham, the point that we were just making was about equality of representation, not equality of precept. And I'm saying that through the COB, I'll give you a cast iron guarantee that we will match in representation that of Dorset if we go forward, and that what you're saying now is in the caveat on the motion. So if you're happy with that.
Yes, I am, but I still think you need that governance issue. You just said that you've had an assurance, but have you got it in writing?
It's actually in the minutes of the COB meeting.
Right.
So So, excuse me, Chair, is there no reason that, there's no reason why we can't put a caveat in it?
There's no reason whatsoever. It's members feel
For information, Chair, could you identify for all those present what you mean by the COB? Many will not be familiar with the expression.
And governance.
It's a combination oversight board, which has been sitting since last December on a regular basis with Dorset, should option 3 be chosen. So members, do you want to put then,
We need to have a separate wording.
yeah, a wording?
I agree with what you're saying because it was at the COB, but members are obviously a little worried about that.
Yes.
I think a simple statement that equalisation of governance representation what would be expected or whatever the words to that effect, that would satisfy all members. I think.
Absolutely.
I agree with you that there was no dispute at the meeting. In fact, it was Dorset that proposed that we should go up by 2 for equalisation. But for satisfaction of members, I think it'd be quite right to put something in there.
Absolutely, and it's so if we come, okay, where's that coming?
Precept.
Okay, right. So it would read that subject to assurance in writing of by 31st December 2014 that DCLG, that precept equalisation to Dorset's level of precept will take place in 2015-16 or 2016-17, and to there being no adverse impact on the business case, and equalisation of representation in governance. Wiltshire and Swindon Fire Authority should adopt scenario 3 as its preferred option. Does that meet with your approval, members?
Yes, I can. Should I just second the Chair? That was a motion.
Well, I'm going to propose from the Chair that is our motion, members, and it's seconded by Councillor Bennett. All those in favour?
Aye.
Right.
We'll leave you to sort the name out.
Thank you. Members, thank you very much for this historic vote. What you've done is you've voted for your own demise. But we will return to another form.
Chairman, would it be worth noting that it was unanimous?
Yes, please, it will be unanimous. All I would say though is that we all, as we've got more business, we all realise that has been stated here with a lot of very great detail to be thrashed out going forward. And we mustn't take our eyes off the ball there, as everybody is aware, I'm sure, sitting here. So thank you for that. Let's go on to item 9, committee membership. To consider the membership of committees. This is based on the fact that Councillor Marshall has had to retire from the Fire Authority, and that Councillor Peter Edge is now replacing Councillor Marshall, and therefore can we go through the committees, and we start with the urgency committee.
Chairman, do we need to do that?
You've all seen this document. Members, are you happy that we have a one-for-one replacement? That's the motion. Are you happy, Councillor? He is. So all those in favour?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry, Bob.
There is a call that we're going to need an extra person on the COB, and that would be appropriate to deal with that now as it's against committees, so that they can be in place for the next COB.
Yes. Yes.
Well, it could be dealt with under urgencies.
Could be what?
Dealt with under urgencies. As an
Yes. We'll put it under any other business. Okay. Yeah, it's not on the. It's right. So we're all in favour of that.
I'll propose that. Propose what? The amendment as per for the change of.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I'll second it. All in favour? Okay, thank you, members. That's passed. Right. Okay. Yeah, we'll now come to the urgent business. Basically, what this is that as we move forward, the COB becomes a shadow authority, and its precise powers will be defined as we go forward. We're not going to throw that forward today, but we do need another member to join the shadow authority.
I'd like to propose that Councillor Payne, if he agrees, would sit in that post, because he has a lot of experience on this committee.
Okay.
Do
Anybody
we have
else?
anybody from Swindon on call?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else who wants to propose anybody else beyond the on the shadow authority, what would it be? Nobody else going to propose anybody else?
Will we have deputies?
Okay.
Will we have deputies aligned for this function as well?
The nature of the business of the shadow authority is so serious that really nobody else, unless they attended every meeting, as you know, Andrew, would be able to take it on board.
Yeah, I'm raising the issue because it hadn't been raised. Not
Yeah. So we've got. I'll second the nomination of Councillor Payne, extremely experienced. Councillor Payne, would you wish to? We would very much like you to join. That's excellent, great. So that's the membership there. Okay. Thank you. Okay, date of next meeting. The next CFA meeting is scheduled for Thursday, the 11th of December. But on members, I assume there was nothing else you wanted to bring up under urgent business. You told me beforehand. Okay. There is no extant business in terms of we need to exclude the public. So, members, thank you very much. It has been an extremely historic occasion. And I wish you well until we meet again. The meeting is now closed.